Four. Hey, it's Mazzy here. I'm here with John. John called me. He's 8 hours ahead in Birmingham, England, and he contacted me. He woke me up out of a sound sleep, because of this 8 hour difference last night, hearing the news of Christine McVie's death. We're recording this on December 1st, 2020, and she passed yesterday. And we're both pretty big Fleetwood Mac fans. And John reached out. You want to do just a little tribute, a little talk about our association, our love of Fleetwood Mac. No particular order. We'll center around Christine, but it'll probably go into other directions. And I think John here, there'll be a link to his channel below too, has a local connection that he'll share why he wanted to do this. So I'm going to hand it over to you, John, to start this
Yeah.
introduction right now.
Okay. Cheers, Maz. So obviously heard last night that Christine McVie had passed away, and then I saw your very brief video. Obviously, you did a very brief tribute last night. Now I've always had a real soft spot for Christine McVie. Fleetwood Mac are one of my favourite bands. They're the first band I ever saw live. So in 1988, I saw them play in Birmingham, and I was 12 years old. And that first concert experience, I think, is something you never ever forget. You're in a room with 10,000 people. I'd never heard music at that volume before. I say this was '88, so this is the Tango in the Night tour. I'm sure we'll come into that in a bit. But I was very aware that Christine McVie always called herself a Brummie. She wasn't born in Birmingham. I'd perhaps describe her as being an honorary Brummie. But she lived most of her childhood in Birmingham. She grew up in Bearwood, which is an area to the north of the city. She went to art college in Birmingham. And I always used to love it, seeing her being interviewed on the TV, speaking in her Birmingham accent. That always used to give me a buzz. She sounded like me.
So did she do the whole yeah, right, yeah, right, yeah, right. Didn't
yeah,
do that.
probably not so much that, but
Is that a
but
Birmingham
yes,
thing? Is that a
no, that's just me. That is Mazzy.
because
But
I only know it from you and Peaky Blinders. Aren't they
oh yeah,
Birmingham?
that's right. Yeah, of course
Right.
they are. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, but no, still, one of my favorite bands. She's responsible for some of my very favorite records, which I'll obviously come on to in a moment, but I'm sure we'll talk through in some detail. But the reason why I got in touch was that I just wanted to talk about these records and about this music, and just really talk about why I love it so much. That was the reason for reaching out and having the conversation.
To me, I feel honored. But there is this thing, and we'll talk about it. They were such a British blues band to begin with, going back to the Peter Green days, and they became this sort of, obviously mostly in '75, but even before that with Bob Welch, a California band in so many
Yeah.
ways, that West Coast sound, which I think we'll talk about a little bit. But a couple things. I was thinking about this. I can't think of any other band that's had the success for so many decades that only the rhythm section, the bass and drums, were the only constant members in the band. And it is a generational thing. People loving the Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham era. I come from that early on, getting into. I think I fell in love with them really like in 1970, and I'll talk about that a little bit. Just prior to Christine coming on. But that is a really interesting thing, how they were successful. Obviously, they didn't hit the success early on as the '75 album, and then of course Rumours, but they were pretty popular. Got a lot of radio play. Obviously, more in the UK with Albatross and
Mm.
some hit singles
Yeah,
with Peter Green.
well, absolutely. And so the sort of Peter Green era certainly had more success over here than they did in the US. I mean, and they're a proper hit band. They had, big hit singles. Albatross was the number one here in the UK. I've got that to hand as well. That best of. Um, but I know that songs such as "Oh Well," "Man of the World," they were like number two, number three hits. That sort of thing. They were proper up there. I think they had something like 4 or 5 top 10 hits in that late '60s period. So they're a big band, and although they were a blues band, they had a distinctive sound. And the one thing that people don't necessarily talk about when they talk about Peter Green is his vocals, his voice. He had a brilliant voice. He was an incredible guitarist, of course, but his voice was so distinctive. And I think of all those sort of blues rock bands, I think he pulled it off best. You know, he had, I say, a beautiful voice and a great songwriter as well. Songs are just Man of the World. What a song, you know, a brilliant lyric.
His vocal on "Love So Bad" and the reissue with all the
Yeah,
versions of "Love." Oh God, it just makes you melt. I'm going to throw in because if since you brought Albatross up, I got to throw out the obvious Beatle connection because John Lennon heard that song. That's where he wrote "Here the Sun King." "Here Comes the Sun King" is basically the kind of the riff, very
yeah.
sound like of Albatross, and he heard that and he just loved that so much, almost like surf like Hawaiian music in a way. It's an
Mm.
unusual instrumental to be on the top of the. I guess in the England is different than the U.S. That was like a top of the chart, #1, I think.
Yeah, it's number one over here, definitely. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
and that's the thing from that period. Obviously, Peter Green was the main guitarist, but at that point they had three great guitarists. Jeremy Spencer, obviously he did his blues thing. You know, he was doing that Elmore James thing. You know, live, and obviously he did that on record as well. And Danny Kerwin as well. I mean, an incredible guitarist. And if you haven't heard his solo albums that he made in the '70s, they're also worth checking out. Another Beatles connection there. He did a great version of "Let It Be." I don't know if you know
yeah,
that version by Danny
yep,
Kerwin.
yep.
It's a gorgeous version, you know. So,
And Jeremy
but
Spencer, even with the children, whatever, it's kind of a fun
yeah,
record in
Children of
certain ways.
God. Yeah,
And of course, let's get back to Christine for a minute. My introduction to him, well, first of all, to her, excuse me, God. But okay, let me. That was a Freudian slip. That, in a way, is an honest Freudian slip because before I knew the name of Christine McVie, first of all, I'm going to show this to begin with because she doesn't play on this record, but she did the artwork. A lot of people don't realize she drew. This is her illustration, and this is the first time that I ever saw the name Christine McVie on any Fleetwood Mac album. And
yeah,
obviously, she came about on this record. And I don't think I remember getting this record. And a lot of times, Future Games and Bare Trees get this reputation of being, middle of the road, easy listening type of stuff. But they're really anything but there's a certain spaciness to it that's really beautiful. It's not MOR by any of the stretch, but there is a mood and tone to this album. But I remember
yeah.
hearing this before I knew who Christine McVie was, because I didn't hear the Christine Perfect album until later on. It came out in 1970. But I heard her and I didn't know it was a woman because when you think of her voice early on, out of context, very much like Danny Kerwin could sound like a woman singing sometimes too. And Jeremy
Yeah.
Spencer, they had these kind of middle to high voices. And Christine has a kind of a medium voice. She's not a high end uh, vocal. And I just, for some reason, I was thinking, oh, they didn't bring in a woman here. That's a man until I realized. But the first time I saw them I realized, was Berkeley Community Theater, 1972, right after this album came out.
Right. Okay.
And on the bill was Savoy Brown and Long John Baldry.
Oh,
and
right.
and then I didn't see him until '75 during the successful, the big California
Yeah.
period. But I fell in love with these records. But I'm going to put a link below to my 2 years, 3 years ago. I did a ranking. This ended up being my top #1 Fleetwood Mac
Yeah.
album. But
Yeah.
and Oh Well wasn't originally on the American version. They added the single on
That's right. Yeah.
later.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I mean, that riff for "Oh Well," I don't think guitar riffs get any better than that.
Oh
That is
God,
just an
right?
incredible piece of guitar playing. But you're just talking about obviously Kristen McVie there. I was listening to this earlier on, obviously to Bare Trees, and she's got a couple of tracks on here. And just mentioning her vocals, I know the first track on here, the first of her tracks on here, "Homeward Bound," she's really singing at the top of her range, and it's got a real energy to it, a real rawness to it. Later on, her certainly the albums that they made sort of after that one, in the way of the Penguin album and Mystery to Me, the records are more. The vocals are more the double tracked. It's very sort of leveled out. It's very smooth. Whereas her vocals on this record are really pushing the top of her range. And as I say, it's really punchy. That track in particular, "Homeward Bound," you can hear her playing electric piano. You can hear her playing Hammond organ as well. It's a great song, and I think perhaps her vocals actually are a little bit underrated. Certainly over the years, you listen to like Stevie Nicks, her voice deteriorated over the years quite
Yeah.
considerably. I don't think Christine McVie's voice changed at all. It was always steady. It was always strong. I mean, it was never a very showy voice, but it never changed.
But
It never weakened.
but there
And
was something about it that was very special. I always preferred her. I said in that little video last night, I always preferred her over Stevie Nicks. Now, again, it's not a competition. They actually worked well
yeah,
together, surprisingly. I mean, I know you probably call out on this record. "Spare Me a Little of Your Love" is like their
yeah,
R&B. It's like you're a big R&B soul guy, and
yeah,
that is such a soulful song. I could just
it is.
did anybody cover it? Any soul artists cover it that you know of?
I don't know actually. I should look that up actually because it would really suit that sort of
Right?
treatment, that sort of
I mean,
soul
it's
voice.
got that
Definitely,
like
yeah,
groove to it. That's real. That almost
yeah,
was different for Fleetwood Mac. And it's a looking at those records you showed, Penguin and Mystery to Me. I mean, I remember it with this thing, the management. I can't remember if it was Led Zeppelin's management who had them for a while. Was it Peter Grant or something that
mm,
wanted to make them a little more rock and after the middle of the road, stuff
yeah.
here, and brought in a couple other. Not, I shouldn't say ringers, but well, I'm sure there's other things, but I'll go get to it as we go along. So
Yeah, no, good stuff. But so as a teenager, as I say, 12, 13, 14 year old, that's when I discovered, that great run of albums, from obviously the White Fleetwood Mac album through to Rumours and then obviously on to Tusk. And I mean, to this day, three of my favorite records. And I've been listening to them today again, and it really does highlight how important each of the songwriters were, how important each of those individual voices were. None of those records would have worked anywhere near as well without any one of those three songwriters. And I think that was proven later on when they came together in the 2000s without Christine, and they put this album out because I do like this record, but it really does miss
that
having
extra.
songs from Christine McVie. It's very calculated. I think there's 18 tracks. There's 9 songs, each for Lindsay and Stevie.
It's very much like
Yeah,
a
and
Lindsey Buckingham album where he plays that acoustic guitar style 3 times as fast than anyone else would normally
yeah,
play whatever guitar bit he plays. And not to knock him, I like him, but I agree with that. I like that record a lot, but you're right. I remember listening to it and I played it a lot and I kept missing that track every third or whatever track of
yeah,
Christine McVie's.
yeah. And that's the great thing about that trilogy of records in the late 70s, the White Fleetwood Mac album through to Rumours through to Tusk. It's the interaction of the three vocalists of the three songwriters. I think that's what really makes those records special.
I want to go back to an older album, because one other track that I didn't mention that I just love, and I listened to this album again last night. Heroes Are Hard to Find, and the opening track, Heroes Are the title track, is a Christine McVie track, which has his horn arrangement. It's again another R&B style track. That's just I think this is a really great underrated. I hate to say underrated, but people don't mention this album a lot. Even Silver Heels, that kind of uh, light song with Bob Welch saying, "If I could sing like Paul McCartney, get funky like Etta James, I'd never change." But I like this record. I think this is of this middle to third period. I don't know how many periods they've had. It seems like they've had three main things, but then three B or three and a half, and then of
Yeah,
course
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Now,
1975 is the half. For you mentioned these records, and this is like the sweet spot when I was working in record stores, and especially Rumors was so huge, such a big record that for about 30 years I couldn't listen to it because I heard it so much in every single. But I do want to do a shout out in terms of just something that is one of my favorite things, and I suggest everyone grab this. Now it'll go up in Discogs. They watch this video. I got this as a promo from Warner Brothers, and this is a 12-inch 45. And this came out probably a month or so before Rumors came out, and of course it is Go Your Own Way in Silver Springs, which should have been on the album that wasn't on the album.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
This is a 45 RPM stereo. I'm surprised they didn't. Oh, actually, they do mono, and it's mono and stereo. when I blasted this, I had these JBL 100 speakers in the mid 70s, and when I blasted "Go Your Own Way," it was one of the most amazing sounding things I ever heard. The explosion, I mean, Mick Fleetwood's drumming on this is amazing, and the guitar playing. I was so excited about this album when I heard this, and I didn't realize, Silver Springs wasn't going to be on the album. I was kind of disappointed. I know you and the Brits, they don't like when singles are on albums. You want more value.
Yeah, well, and actually, it's interesting. I was looking earlier on that the singles from this record, they charted in the UK, but they weren't big hits. I think Dreams was possibly the biggest hit from this record, and it might have got into the top 30. There weren't really big singles, but obviously the album was massive. Now, I find it interesting the fact that you said obviously you listened to this so much back in the 70s that you couldn't listen to it for 30 odd years. Because this is now, as a teenager, I played to death, and I've never got so sick of this record. Everything about it. I mean, it's a perfect record. Every song is fantastic. Again, it's that mixture of styles, between each songwriter. But again, Lindsey Buckingham's guitar playing is just absolutely exceptional throughout the record as well.
Yeah.
But I never get tired of hearing Dreams or Go Your Own Way or Don't Stop. No matter how many times I played on the radio.
I wonder if it has to do with working in a store and its product.
Probably.
more than just a record I enjoyed. I took it home. We had these 4x4 big sheets we would hang in the store from the record companies, 4x4 blow up on the cover. And my first apartment for a while, I had the 4x4 in the hallway. I brought it home after the promo came down. And then after a while, I just lost it. But I remember like opening every time, like it seemed like every year or less than a year, a new Fleetwood Mac album would come out in the early 70s. They kept pounding out records, and they were touring a lot. I missed a lot of the shows. They were touring all the time in the States. Around
so did you see them
70s.
did you see them around the time of Rumours?
I saw them in 75 when this came out. I saw this tour at the Oakland Coliseum. And then I saw Bill Graham, who did, the Fillmore, had a thing starting in 76, I believe, 75, 6, 7, 8, called Days on the Green. And they were at the outdoor baseball stadium where the Oakland A's played. And it was like an 8-10 hour show, and the massive show, of course, in 76. And someone reminded me on the video last night, I forgot the opening act was Boz Scaggs. And then I don't remember what order. I think they were the headliners, and the Eagles. Of course, the Eagles had Hotel California, and Boz Scaggs had Silk Degrees. So three massive on one bill in an outdoor stadium all day, Days on the Green. That was the last time I saw them until 3-4 years ago. I did go see, and I don't know why, on a whim, I went to see the Mike Campbell, Neil Finn tour.
Yeah. Okay.
I loved it, but I did miss, I did miss her. I did miss Christine dramatically. But it was a good show anyway.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, so my first gig was Fleetwood Mac on the Tango in the Night tour, but of course at that point Lindsey Buckingham had left the band, so it's this weird period after Tango in the Night where they brought in two more guitarists. Yep, they brought in Billy Burnett, Johnny Burnett's son, and Rick Vito, and they basically turned up and played all of the Lindsey parts, but of course it took two of them to be able to play his parts, whatever. And it was quite a weird thing. I mean, obviously as a 12-year-old, I didn't really quite understand, the difference, and I loved it. And so much so that I saw them again in 1990 at Wembley Stadium, which was on this tour. I don't know whether you have this album, Mazzy, Behind the Mask.
I have it on CD.
Yeah. So, and I have a real soft spot for this. I've got a fondness for this. It's not a perfect record by any means, but and again, I'd say that Christine McVie's songs are probably the strongest songs on this record. But it's a nice enough record. But yeah, so that was my sort of introduction in the late 80s to the band, but via this lineup.
I gotta say, I've gotten castigated, I guess, on my ranking video. I think I either didn't include this or forgot to include. I don't like this record. I like the single. I think it's a generational thing, and I think I don't like it because I don't like the 80s flourishes of the piano or the keyboards flourishes on this record. But I know it's a generational thing. I just got, and this was a period. What year was this? 87. Okay.
87. Yeah.
I was into something
else. You clearly don't like it, but so this was. But I own it.
But I own it, so that's something, right?
You're right. Yeah. Well, But this was my first Fleetwood Mac album, and I actually played this on the way to work this morning. I was caught the train to work, and listen to it on my headphones, and I think it still sounds great. I mean, it's obviously that late '80s production sound, but it's Lindsey Buckingham's production. It almost gives it a bit of a. I always find his production sound is quite claustrophobic. It's quite compressed. But I do like it. I think it's a lovely record. Big Love, of course, is a wonderful song, but then songs such as Little Lies, Everywhere, Family Man,
Little Lies was
really
a
nice
hit. I like
singles.
Little Lies
Yeah,
actually. Yeah. Are you aware of
cheers, mate.
two things? And you probably are since it's your favorite band. The very short-lived Fleetwood Mac with Dave Mason in the band, for one,
Yeah,
on tour, not on records. And then there was that phony Fleetwood Mac that toured, that the manager toured at some point. Remember that?
yeah, yeah. So I can't think who the manager was who put that together,
I
actually.
don't know.
So, but yeah,
Obviously,
but yeah,
some wanker
yeah.
had
Well, that's what you say. But it's yeah. I mean, just look at. I mean, saying it's one of my favorite bands. There are so many different bands, different lineups, different sounds within that band name over the course of 50 years or whatever. It's obviously the Buckingham Nicks era that gets all the attention. But as you say, that there's so many little windows, little pockets of music which are slightly outside of that, which are so important. What else have we got here?
Look, I want to talk about Over and Over. I love the opening of this. Now, I'm a huge fan of this album. This is one of those albums that people, I remember when it came out, like there's kind of a what the fuck moment where after all these great hit things, they come out with this double album, sprawling album. I mean, the easiest comparison is the White Album. There's too much stuff. There's little bits of weird stuff. I love Tusk. I think that's a brilliant record on its own. But Over and Over, that's a great opener. And it's not it's just a slow build up on that, That's just so wonderful.
It gives you a false sense of security, that song does, because obviously this is a follow up to Rumours, and Over isn't too dissimilar to that Rumours sound, is it? But then all of a sudden you go from Over and Over into The Ledge, which is I think Lindsey Buckingham plays everything on that song, so it's quite jarring, the jump from Over and Over to The Ledge. And you suddenly realise then, hang on a minute, what am I getting myself into here? But it's a brilliant record, and this is a record that gets better with age.
Yes.
It definitely is. Absolutely.
I mean, that's not funny anymore. It's one of those throwaway kind of Paul McCartney type songs that he would have put on some record that John Lennon would have just like, oh my God, I can't, obla di obla da or something, But I to this day, the more I hear this record, I hear something new on it, something a little different. It is unusual. Any other Christine songs? I mean,
well, actually, talking about Tusk, definitely the song that really jumped out when I was playing it earlier on is the song Brown Eyes. Again, it's that very slow build up, similar to Over and Over, but a gorgeous song. But this album, of course, with the elaborate packaging, double album. I think that the equivalent cost of it back in 1978 or 79 when it came out, I think it would retail at the equivalent of something like $55-$60 today, which
it was like I remember it was a $11.98 list price, which is no, I'm sorry, I can tell here because Americans had it. The list price was $15.98, which means you could get it for maybe $12, maybe 11 something at Tower Records, which it was a lot in 1978 for a 78, 79 for a blue record. And remember, this is right in the height of the punk thing. So for them to do something off kilter was kind of cool, I thought, personally.
And didn't one of the radio stations over in the States play the thing in its entirety before the album came out? So when Warner Brothers were looking at the sales, they're obviously disappointed the fact it sold like 4 million copies or something compared to the ridiculous amount of records that Rumours shifted. So part of the reason for it was the price, because it's a double album with all this elaborate packaging as well. They had to put a heavy price tag on it. But I think about a fortnight before the record came out, a station played the thing in full, start to finish. And of course, at the time of home taping, everybody just recorded it.
Well, that brings me, when I mentioned the White Album, that brings me in. Of course, those of you who watch my channel know I'm going to bring the Beatles in like every other time if I have a chance. 1968, November, I set up this elaborate, I thought it was elaborate. I had a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and I put a timer on it because the radio station in the middle of the day when I was in school, was going to play the entire Beatles White Album. And this was a few weeks before it came out. So I set my tape recorder up and it did it. It worked. I don't know how, looking back, I don't know what the fuck I did with the timer and electric or something. And it recorded the whole White Album. So I had it for about 2 or 3 weeks before it came out. In those
Right.
days, I mean, all 30 songs on that record and everything. And there was the local radio station, KFRC, would put out these weekly top 30 charts.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
on that week, they put out all 30 songs on the album as their chart, kind of as a, I used to
Yeah.
have that. I have it's probably somewhere still. And I thought that was really funny. But it was that same type of thing. I had friends that worked at Warner Brothers at this point, and they were
Okay.
pushing the hell out of this. And some
Yeah.
people just, they moved on to something else for a while. They just didn't get it.
But all credit to Lindsey Buckingham for this record. I mean, his songs, they sound strange in comparison to everything else on the record and everything else in the catalog up to this point. But they are fantastic. As you say, stuff like "What Makes You Think You're the One," um, "Not That Funny," "The Ledge." Again, it's almost a claustrophobic sound. The sound that he creates with his production. I think he plays most of the instruments on those songs as well, apart from Mick Fleetwood adding drums and percussion afterwards. But it's a weird sounding record. It's a strange
and I
record.
guess the obvious thing would call it, and I mean this, it's going to sound like a negative. This is such a self-indulgent record when you think about it.
Absolutely, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
I think at the point when it was recorded, it was the most expensive album ever made. I mean, obviously since then we've had Chinese democracy, haven't we, with Guns N' Roses? But I think in 1979 when this came out, this was the most expensive album ever recorded.
Wow. Going back to Christine, this is the first album she actually played on, and it's funny in America. I don't remember why, but they switched the colors at one point, went back and forth.
Right.
This is the main one, and then it came to this. I never had this until when I went through my friend's copy, the Coleman collection. So he was a huge Fleetwood Mac. In fact, I think we saw the 75 or 76 show together. But it's weird that they just changed this palette and the color. No other differences as far as I know. But this is the first debut of Christine Perfect. It even says Perfect. I no longer have that Christine Perfect album. Do you have that record?
No, I don't have it. No, I don't have it. I don't know why I haven't got that actually.
I used to have it, and then they reissued it when Fleetwood Mac got popular again.
Yeah.
The Christine Perfect
Yeah.
album under Christine McVie. Yeah, there's a great one of the songs.
I had to reissue at some point.
I think one of the songs is produced by Danny Kerwin on there, right? There's a Jeremy
Right.
Spencer one track.
Right. Okay.
Beautiful track. Right. Beautiful track.
Yeah. Incidentally, with regards to the White Fleetwood Mac album, the single versions of that were released were all different mixes, or I think in some cases it might have been different versions full stop. So if you're a fan and trying to track down that sort of stuff, they're worth picking up because they sound noticeably different.
I picked this up at Record Store Day because except for the Rumours CD with the extra alternate versions, I don't have any of the alternate versions, and I wasn't going to get this, and it was like FOMO, fear of missing out. I bought this. This is all the LPs of only the alternate versions that came out for Record Store Day. So I picked it up, and now I'm sure it's going to go crazy again. Yeah,
I have picked them up as they've come out individually for Record Store Day.
Okay, I didn't. So this is perfect for me then. Okay,
yeah, it's good, and they're all a good listen as well. They're all interesting. As you say, it's made up of demos and different versions and such like. So definitely something worth picking up for any fans out there. But the other album from the sort of end of that Tusk period that I really like is this live album.
I don't have that.
Came out in 1980. Yeah, no, this is a really nice record. It's not a single gig. It's made up of tracks from various shows throughout the Tusk tour, some from the Rumours tour, and I think there's a couple of songs from 1975 as well. So it's a good spread. But I think as a live document, I think it's excellent. And this is something that this is perhaps an album that I've played as much as Tusk and the White Fleetwood Mac album over the years. I think it's a cracking live recording. Really nice stuff. Definitely worth looking for if you're out and about.
Do you have okay, I guess we're going to wind down a little bit here just because it's an honor of Christine. if you could you pick one track just to kind of throw out there and that your favorite of a Christine track?
Yeah, and it'll probably be one of the hits as well. I'll probably Say You Love Me from the White Fleetwood Mac album.
I was just going to say the same thing. I
There you
just
go.
love I love her vocal on that. I love the drumming on that, and the
Yeah,
production on that. This is Keith Olsen. This he was a
yeah,
hot producer around this time. It kind of, I mean, it made them more of a pop sound, and obviously, long lovers of Fleetwood Mac couldn't. Some people couldn't handle this Californiization
yeah. But I
of
get that.
Fleetwood Mac.
It's a totally different sounding band, isn't it? That's fair enough.
Well, that goes
And
full
yeah,
circle.
of course it
Why
does.
what other band is there any other band that's gone through so many member change, especially lead singers and guitar players?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
you got is John McVie and Nick Fleetwood. That's the only
yeah,
constant.
yeah.
How
And you can
crazy is
see
that?
why. Just because you like Rumours doesn't necessarily mean you're going to like the Peter Green era Fleetwood Mac, because it's a totally different sounding band. And I mean, there is a bit of a crossover here and there, but on the whole, that old school electric blues, there's not a whiff of that on Rumours or Tusk or the White Fleetwood Mac album. So I can see why people would like the band and perhaps love some of these records, but not like their whole catalog. It goes without saying to me.
I do remember, and I don't have a set list here, but there's that period early on in '75 when this came out. When I saw them here, they were doing some of the old. I think they did "Oh Well," and in
Yeah,
fact they continued to do "Oh Well" for many years,
yeah,
on and off. Uh, and some of the hit or the bluesy numbers on the Peter Green years in that middle. Obviously, "Hypnotize" was one they would bring back, and
yeah.
we didn't mention like very much about Bob Welch in that period, but that was sort of the first dip into the Californiizing of Fleetwood Mac a little bit, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that without Bob Welsh, they wouldn't have got to Rumours, because it was a gradual change throughout that period to get to Buckingham and so
Well, there was I try to think what song it was. I think it was on this album. There was one song I played last night when I played like four of these albums around this period. There was one song I thought, oh my God, that's like the '75 Fleetwood Mac before Lindsey
yeah,
Buckingham. I don't remember what song it was. I wish I could, because all of a sudden I heard that rhythm, the way the bass and the drums hooked together, that sounded like Monday Morning or things like from this record. That
yeah.
produ- production sound, and I don't remember what it was, but they were kind of going in that direction before Buckingham Nicks came. But I love it still. So
There you go. Yeah, just one other to mention is this album, The Dance. This live album, I think it's about '97,
I don't have that.
and yeah, this is definitely worth picking up. Um, it's got the incredible version of Big Love on it, where we just Lizzie Buckingham on his own playing it. Obviously, that incredible guitar style. I think that's probably my favorite version of that song. But this is a really nice compilation. Obviously just playing the hits basically, but it's got everything on there that you'd want to hear. But yeah, a lovely live recording that is.
I didn't bring it here. I didn't bring any CDs, but I do like that. There's that little black box of four CDs,
Yeah,
I believe. It's their anthology up to that point. And I
is it
remember
25
getting it.
years? I think, yeah,
Yeah.
25 years,
And
wasn't
I
it?
was disappointed that it was so heavy on the later stuff. It had some of the early stuff, but I wish it had one more disc or had maybe six, seven, eight more songs from the
Yeah,
early period. I think it emphasized the later period too much from my point of view. But I guess that's
yeah,
what the audience
that's
dictates, I
right. Yeah,
guess. So
that's right.
I'm
Yeah,
out of the loop here. Any
good.
final words?
No, there you go. That was great, Mazzy. I say I've had obviously since hearing the news last night, I've been playing these albums back to back and basically just reliving my teenage years. Obviously, we haven't talked about Mirage. I'm not a big fan of that record. That's why I
I
haven't
just
shown
wanted to
that.
show her because this is one of the few albums you can actually see her
Yeah,
beautifully on the cover. Really, like
that's right.
none of the albums except for the back that she's showcased as much as this. And I just
Yeah.
look at that. What a beautiful woman. What a beautiful voice. Talented keyboard player. They finally
There
put
was a
this
lovely.
guy on. They finally put this guy in the back instead of
That's
on the
right for a
front
change.
with his knockers. Yeah.
there was a lovely quote from Christine McVie where she basically says that obviously most rock stars they live the good life and then they basically turn their back on drink and drugs and say what a terrible time it was. And she actually said that champagne and cocaine made her play better. And I thought, well, fair play, so great stuff.
It's funny when this album came out. This album was recorded at in Sausalito, California, most of it.
Yeah,
right across the Golden Gate at the record plant. And there was infamous stories like in Rolling Stone at the time. This is the time when Rolling Stone was the big magazine of, all the cocaine, all the debauchery, and then obviously, several years after he goes bankrupt. Can you imagine having this muck and going bankrupt after? I mean, the cocaine in the hot tub. Actually, I've been to the record plant. There was a hot tub there, and it's a beautiful area, like right in the Bay, San Francisco Bay. Yeah. But that was like crazy times for all of them. Look at that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I never had an afro like that. So
that's a hairy man, that is.
Well, thank you. I'm going to put links below to John's channel. If you like soul and R&B, and I mean, stuff like this too, not just that, but there's no one better in that respect. I'll put a link to my ranking Fleetwood Mac from a couple of years ago. And again, my spoiler is this was number one for me. But that's it. Thanks, John. Thanks for inviting me to this subject. And our best to Christine. We love her. So long, Christine.
Absolutely.